Hey guys, today's story is a little different. It's not about some explosive argument or a dramatic walkout. It's about the kind of betrayal that unfolds in silence in a boardroom lit too brightly, in the shallow half-smile of someone who shakes your hand while twisting the knife. My name's Johnson Ward. I'm 42. For the past 11 years, I worked as the senior project director at a mid-sized tech firm in Seattle. Not flashy, not Fortune 100, but respected. Competitive. Stable. Or so I thought. And if you think karma's slow, wait until you hear this. So, before you get pulled in, take a second to like this video and subscribe, but only if you actually believe that betrayal always comes back around. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever had someone try to knock you down just to make themselves look taller. Now sit back, let the room go quiet, and let me tell you how it really went down. It was a Monday morning. Gray, like most Seattle mornings. The kind that drizzles from the sky and seeps into your sleeves. I showed up early as usual. Made coffee the way no one else bothered to, medium roast, fresh grounds, full carafe. People appreciated it, even if they didn't say it out loud. At 9:03 a.m., the team filed into the glass conference room. All familiar faces. The devs, the ops managers, even Denise from HR, who usually only joined when something was being restructured. I felt something in the air, something tight. Still. Like the moment just before a storm hits. Then he walked in. Martin Chambers, RVP. Fresh haircut. New watch. Wide smile, like he was about to drop something big, and he did. He stood at the head of the table, clapped his hands once, and said, "Thanks everyone. Before we dive in, just a quick announcement about some internal realignment." I knew that phrase. It always meant someone was about to be demoted or deleted. He kept talking, jargon heavy. Synergies, streamlining, vertical focus. I tuned out for a second until I heard my name. Johnson will be transitioning into a more support-oriented capacity, assisting with documentation and compliance logistics moving forward. Silence. Just silence. I blinked. Support-oriented? Documentation? That was 5 rungs below my title. That wasn't even lateral, that was down. And he said it like he was announcing a potluck. No warning. No meeting beforehand. No explanation. Just stripped of a decade's worth of work in front of people I had mentored. Led. Protected when deadlines threatened to drown them. I glanced around the room. No one made eye contact. Even Jen, Amy's second-in-command, just stared at her laptop like she was trying to merge into another reality. I didn't speak. Didn't object. Didn't storm out. I just nodded, slowly. And said, "Understood." That was all. Because I knew that moment wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. They thought I'd take it. That I'd shrink into the corner and thank them for keeping me on the payroll. They'd underestimated me the way quiet people always get underestimated, assuming we have no claws because we don't bare our teeth. But I had something better than anger. I had time. After the meeting, Martin patted me on the shoulder and said something about new energy, and how this was a strategic shift to maximize our internal flow. Corporate nonsense that meant nothing, yet somehow meant everything. Back at my desk, me new one, smaller, tucked between the break room and the copier, I sat down. No one came by. Not one person said, "I'm sorry." They were afraid of Martin. Afraid of the next axe. But I wasn't. Because I knew something they didn't. See, over the past 6 years, I had quietly become the backbone of our company's operations. I knew the systems, not just how they worked, but how they talked to each other. I knew the legacy code no one else would touch. I knew where the data silos were buried, who kept sloppy logs, which contracts were shaky on compliance. I didn't just build the ship. I knew exactly where the leaks were. And they had just handed me a clipboard and told me to walk the decks. So I smiled. And I started walking. Because this was no longer a job. It was a countdown. And I had already started the clock. There's a kind of numbness that sets in when you've been publicly reduced. Not pain. Not yet. Just static. Like a radio tuned slightly off station, buzzing faintly behind your thoughts. That's how I felt my first week in the new role. Sitting between the break room and the copier, listening to the low hiss of the coffee machine sputtering, and pretending to scroll through documentation like it still mattered. The silence from the team was deafening. No one said much. No congratulations. No condolences. They just adjusted like people do when someone's been buried but there's no funeral. And Martin? He never followed up. No one from HR ever reached out. It was like my name had been quietly deleted from the mental org chart. The only time I saw him was in passing, usually walking briskly down the hall, coffee in hand, laughing too loud at something his assistant said. But I knew him. I knew Martin didn't make moves for no reason. He was the type who liked to clear the stage so he could own the spotlight. And my demotion wasn't just about power, it was about elimination. He wanted the history of this place rewritten with him as the architect. I was just a wall in the way. But what he didn't realize was I was load-bearing. He'd gotten bold because he thought I had no leverage. But I had leverage. More than he could imagine. Because over the past 6 years, I'd quietly led the design and deployment of every major system we used. Payroll automation, security protocols, data redundancy, third-party vendor routing. I wrote the documentation. Not because anyone asked, but because I didn't trust them to do it right. I'd even built an internal tool that allowed us to catch errors before quarterly reports were compiled. It saved the company nearly $2.1 million over 5 years. Everyone used it. No one ever asked who made it. They just assumed it appeared. Like magic. But I kept receipts. Not metaphorical ones, actual documentation. Logs. Change histories. Email threads. Server credentials. Audit notes. Version backups. All of it cataloged in my encrypted personal drive. Not to sabotage. Not back then. But because I believe in protecting what you build. And now, it was my parachute. But I didn't rush. Because revenge isn't a sprint, it's a scalpel. So I stayed still. Watched. Listened. Learned. I watched Jenna get promoted into a new role that looked suspiciously like my old one, only stripped of half the authority and none of the strategy. I watched Martin consolidate access, redirect projects, push people to meet absurd timelines with impossible specs. And I watched people break. One day I found Leo, one of our junior developers, in the hallway outside the server room, pacing like a caged animal. He looked up at me and whispered, "He made me skip QA. Says we don't have time." Another day, a compliance auditor emailed me directly, confused about a line of code in one of our reporting tools. She'd been told I no longer handled that, but no one else could explain the logic. So I helped her. Quietly. Correctly. Then I made a note. Every misstep, every oversight, every shortcut Martin forced through, I documented it all. Not maliciously. Just methodically. And then I started writing. Not a rant. Not an exposé. Something quieter. More precise. My resignation letter. But not the kind you think. Not 2 lines and a sigh. This was a memoir with footnotes. I titled it, "On Quiet Contributions and Systemic Oversight, a farewell analysis. 12 pages. 3 appendices. Every system I had built or improved, listed with timelines and impact metrics. Every protocol I had written, every procedure I had stabilized. Followed by an honest but razor-sharp reflection on why none of it had been enough to protect me from a political firing cloaked as realignment. I never used Martin's name, but I described the decisions. The ones only he could have made. And in the final paragraph, I dropped a quiet bomb. As of this writing, several compliance vulnerabilities remain unresolved, issues I flagged multiple times before my role was reassigned. Should regulatory bodies request internal audit trails, I advised the company to cross-reference my project logs archived under the internal tag, UID_core. I printed 2 copies. One went to HR. The other? I emailed to myself and CC'd a private address. One connected to someone I used to mentor. Someone who now happened to be a columnist at a well-known industry publication. I hit send. Then I shut my laptop, took a breath, and walked out of that building for the last time. No tears. No scene. Just one man stepping away from the structure he built, knowing exactly where the cracks would appear. Because I left more than an empty desk behind. I left a blueprint for collapse. And Martin? He had no idea what was coming. I expected the company to brush it off. Maybe a sterile farewell email. A recycled line about Johnson moving on to new opportunities. I figured they'd bury my resignation letter in a folder somewhere, slap a non-disclosure footer on the record, and carry on with their chaos. That's not what happened. It took 48 hours for the storm to start. On Wednesday morning, I woke up to a text from my former team lead. Dude, your letter is everywhere. At first, I didn't understand. Then I checked my inbox. There it was, a feature article titled, "The Resignation Letter That Could Reshape How Tech Firms Treat Their Architects." My words. My paragraphs. Quoted. Analyzed. Framed with words like, exposing systemic erasure, and quiet labor rebellion. The journalist didn't just publish excerpts. She contextualized everything: how quiet technical workers often become invisible scaffolding in loud companies, how structure gets overshadowed by sales, and how strategy disappears when egos take over. And she named the company. Not because I had, because the public SEC filings matched the systems I mentioned. The reader base was smart. They pieced it together in hours. By noon, it was viral. Tech forums exploded. Subreddits analyzed every line. One post titled, "Who the hell demotes a guy who wrote your compliance backbone?" got 23,000 upvotes in 4 hours. LinkedIn lit up. Executives from other firms shared the letter with captions like, "We need to do better. Silent loyalty is still loyalty. This reads like poetry and a warning." People I hadn't spoken to in a decade reached out. Mentors. Interns. Clients. Even some of Martin's allies from way back messaged to say they were ashamed they didn't speak up, or wish they had known what was going on behind the curtain. Meanwhile, inside the company, it was chaos. I knew because people started leaking the internal emails, screenshots, Slack messages. One thread showed Martin trying to downplay my contributions, writing, "He was more of a process guy, not core to the product." But someone fired back. "He wrote the data scrubber that kept us from a major audit penalty. That process guy saved your job." Oof. Another leak came from HRAN. Internal memos circulated hastily after my letter gained traction. It said something about reaffirming our commitment to recognizing unsung contributors and upholding transparency moving forward. But it was too late. Investors noticed. A few called emergency meetings. One particularly vocal partner demanded a post-mortem on personnel integrity, which is corporate for figure out why you're bleeding trust on Twitter. Then came the cherry on top. The compliance board, remember that team I had warned in my final paragraph, requested access to archived system logs. The exact ones I'd referenced under the tag Hewitt_core. That tag wasn't random. It led to every documented instance of Martin overriding system safeguards. Not illegal, but definitely unethical. And suddenly, the VP of New Energy found himself in very old, very hot water. I didn't gloat. I didn't tweet. I didn't post a "told you so" on LinkedIn. I went quiet. Because the most powerful kind of revenge isn't loud. It's measured. It's when the silence after your departure says more than you ever could while sitting at your desk. Martin tried to do damage control. He held an all-hands Zoom meeting where he rambled about company vision and learning moments, but no one bought it. Because behind him, you could see his office. Empty shelves. No awards. No warmth. He looked like a man trying to decorate a crumbling wall with PowerPoint slides. The board didn't fire him yet. But they stripped him of strategic oversight and placed him on advisory leave. That's polite speak for sit down and shut up while we assess the mess you made. Meanwhile, the devs? They built a Slack emoji with my initials, Johnson wins. They used it every time someone pushed stable code or finished a clean QA cycle. It became a signal. Not just of rebellion but of respect. I never asked for any of this. I just wanted to walk away with my dignity intact. But what I got was a legacy. And it kept growing. A few weeks later, an email hit my inbox. Subject: Keynote Opportunity Internal Systems Summit 2025. They wanted me to speak. Not about revenge. Not about drama. But about resilience and the invisible architecture of organizations. I accepted. Not because I wanted the spotlight, but because I knew there were hundreds of Johnsons out there, quiet professionals, turned into footnotes by louder, flashier figures. And I wanted them to know. Your silence doesn't make you small. It makes you dangerous to underestimate. The keynote was scheduled for March. 3 months out. Enough time to plan, too much time to forget. But I didn't forget. I'd been preparing for years, just didn't know it. Every buried slight, every ignored win, every lunch eaten alone while someone else got credit, it all added up. Still, even with the buzz of industry attention building around my name, I kept my head low. That's what life teaches you when you've been publicly humbled. Don't mistake the applause for armor. But I wasn't just preparing for a keynote. Because something else had started to happen. A week after the article went viral, a message landed in my inbox. No subject line. Just a name, Riley Benton. I didn't recognize it at first. Looked like spam. The kind you delete between sips of black coffee. Then I opened it. We've been following your work, Johnson. Quiet doesn't mean invisible. Let's talk. Sign: Riley Benton, founder and CEO, Northgrid Systems. I'd heard the name in passing. Riley was one of those industry builders who preferred terminal windows to TED Talks. Northgrid was a stealth mode infrastructure company, low PR, high performance. Word was they were working on something big, possibly government adjacent, but no one knew what. I met her in a nondescript cafe tucked behind a row of trees in Capitol Hill. Nothing flashy. Riley showed up in a black jacket, jeans, and a notebook so worn it looked like it had survived a hurricane. We didn't shake hands. She sat down, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "What you wrote most people don't have the courage to put in their heads, let alone send to HR." I shrugged. I didn't write it to go viral. She nodded. That's why it did. Then she pulled out a folder. Inside, blueprints, systems architecture, secure cloud integrations. It was a skeleton plan for something I hadn't seen before: civil infrastructure for encrypted public systems. Think fire departments, city hospitals, school district records running on one airtight digital spine. We've got funding. We've got vision. We need backbone. You interested? No offer. No salary discussion. Just a seat at the table. Founding partner. Lead systems architect. I took the folder home. Studied it under a desk lamp with a highlighter and my old engineering pen. By morning, I'd already scribbled in 3 new fail-safes and 2 potential conflict points. And I knew. This wasn't just another job. This was a new structure to build in my own terms. 2 weeks later, I signed. While that was happening, the tremors from my letter hadn't stopped echoing. Jenna called late one night. They're imploding. Martin was losing control. The internal audit I hinted at in my resignation had sparked something bigger. A third-party firm brought in under the board's radar discovered several discrepancies in Martin's budget routing. Nothing criminal, but a web of questionable discretion. Unapproved contractor invoices. Projects launched without documentation. Changes made directly into production environments with no rollback logs. All things I'd quietly stabilized while I was there now exposed because they ignored the glue I'd provided. The audit team started asking questions. When Martin couldn't answer, he deflected. Blamed. Legacy protocols. Claimed he inherited a mess. But the timestamps told a different story. They pointed back to the months after my demotion when he had full control and no clue how to steer the ship. And the final nail? A vendor one I'd introduced years back mailed a complaint that their payments were late, and project milestones had been missed. The delay? Caused by a shortcut Martin insisted on to save cost. The board had seen enough. They didn't make an announcement. Just revoked his access. Wiped his name off the company's site. Strategic realignment, they called it, his own words, now folded back into his undoing. Poetic. And Jenna? She stayed. Promoted eventually. But she told me something on our last call that stuck. They framed your resignation letter. It's hanging in the new HR conference room. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it meant someone else might read it when they were being told they were too quiet, too soft, too invisible. Meanwhile, Northgrid was blooming. Every week we signed on a new city department. Riley was a visionary, but grounded. She never asked for speed-only stability. She understood what I brought to the table, not fireworks, not charisma architecture. Systems that didn't need babysitting. Frameworks that protected users from their own worst habits. It was the first time in years I felt like what I'd built couldn't be taken away by one man's insecurity. And then, the moment I didn't expect. Another message. From a corporate address I recognized instantly. Martin's old assistant. He asked me to reach out. He'd like to speak with you. Said it's personal. I never replied. Because here's the thing about revenge, it's not served hot or cold. It's served when you no longer need the plate. March arrived with that sharp clarity Seattle gets in early spring, gray skies breaking into sudden light, everything blooming like it forgot how long the winter was. The kind of weather that makes people believe in fresh starts. And for me, it was. The internal systems summit wasn't glitzy, no grand stages, no overpolished tech demos. Just people who understood how the world really runs, in the back end, in protocols, in silent fail-safes no one notices until they're gone. I stepped into the venue at 9 a.m. sharp. Badged in. Found my green room. No butterflies, just breath. Long, slow ones. I wasn't nervous. I'd lived this story. Every word had already been carved into my spine. Still, as I looked over the theater rows of quietly ambitious engineers, security analysts, and infrastructure planners, I realized something strange. They already knew who I was. Not just my name. My voice. My silence. One guy, early 30s, wore a black hoodie with a Python logo, caught my eye. He nodded once. Not fanboy energy. Not adoration. Just solidarity. Like we'd both eaten the same dirt. At exactly 11:02 a.m., I took the stage. No slides. No sound effects. Just a mic, a bottle of water, and me. I opened the way you do when you don't need to impress anymore. The most dangerous system's failure isn't in your servers. It's in the belief that the people who build quietly don't matter. And from there it flowed. I told them how I'd been demoted in front of my entire team. How I sat by the copier for 6 weeks while the systems I built continued running the company without my name attached. I didn't name Martin. Didn't have to. Instead, I gave them what they came for, a blueprint. A map of what quiet labor really looks like, how we build systems without ego, and how the people who rely on those systems often forget they didn't appear out of thin air. I talked about how companies confuse noise with leadership, speed with direction, title with value. And then I paused. Let the silence stretch for a beat too long. You want to future-proof your systems? Start by valuing the people who'd rather fix things than talk about them. I saw pens stop moving. A few hands rose to chins. No phones were out. They were listening. Not clapping yet. Listening. Afterward, when I stepped down, the applause came slowly, but it didn't stop. It didn't swell. It sustained. Like rainfall tapping gently against glass. I spent the next 2 hours shaking hands, answering questions, sharing coffee with people who never get invited to speak, only to stabilize. Engineers. Process managers. The ones who normally write the notes, not the headlines. Then came the ripple. Within 48 hours, clips of the speech were circulating across LinkedIn and private Slack groups. A senior analyst from a major cloud provider reposted it with a caption that simply said, "Finally, someone said it." My inbox filled up again. Invitations. Podcasts. Internal workshops. Offers to speak at universities. One from MIT's own Systems Ethics Division. But one message hit different. It came from a woman named Claire, head of infrastructure at a logistics firm in Georgia. Your story isn't rare. That's what's heartbreaking. I've seen 4 people just like you disappear from companies that needed them most. She closed with, "But it helps to know someone made it out and told the truth." I read that line 5 times. Made it out. Told the truth. That's what this was really about. Not revenge in the classic sense. Not blood for blood. It was airing the silence. Making noise just long enough to pull the next person up through it. But while the industry absorbed my voice, Martin's world continued to shrink. I found out through Jenna she kept me updated in short, surgical texts. He tried to get rehired as a consultant. Board declined. His name's off all project documentation. It's like he was never here. Then one day, "FYI, our new CTO just quoted your keynote in an all hands." And that's when I knew. I'd rewritten the legacy. Not mine. His. Because his career had been built on erasure. And now he was the one erased. Not out of vengeance. Out of necessity. He'd become a cautionary tale. A slide in a training deck. A footnote beneath a warning label that said, "Don't let this happen here." And I was the antidote. Back at Northgrid, things moved fast but never loose. We onboarded 2 new cities. I helped draft a new encrypted protocol for 911 dispatchers. Real systems. Real people. Real stakes. Every night I walked home, not tired but filled. Not just with accomplishment, but with something deeper. Restoration. Not validation. That comes from other people. Restoration comes from within. Because somewhere along the way, I'd become the person I always wanted to be, calm, respected, undeniable. No corner office needed. No flashy title. Just legacy quiet, steady, and unstoppable. They say the real test of a man isn't how he behaves when he's on top, but how he carries himself after the fall, and even more than that, in the quiet space that follows. That silence, that vacuum between collapse and redemption, is where most people lose themselves. But not me. Because I didn't rebuild my life to prove anyone wrong. I rebuilt it because I knew who I was before they tried to rewrite me. And by the time they realized their mistake, I was already gone. No fanfare. No vengeance speech. Just distance. In the months that followed my keynote, North Grid expanded beyond anything we originally imagined. More municipalities signed on. Federal agencies expressed interest. One state even began testing our system to unify their emergency response platforms real-time, encrypted coordination between fire departments, school districts, and hospitals. I was leading that architecture. Quietly. Strategically. Without needing anyone to clap after each commit. This was no longer a comeback. It was a redefinition. The man they called too expensive, the one they shoved into the copy room, was now laying the digital foundation of the future. Not in theory. In practice. But the part one didn't expect. What caught me off guard was how many people from my past reached out. Quiet emails. DMs from former coworkers. Some just said, "Thank you." Others apologized for not speaking up back then. A few asked if I was hiring. The irony wasn't lost on me. I answered each message with the same tone I wish someone had used on me when I was drowning in silence. Calm, understanding, but clear. I had room for allies. Not opportunists. Martin, though? He didn't reach out. Not directly. But I heard through Jenna that he tried consulting at a mid-tier firm. Made it 6 weeks before they quietly let him go. Something about cultural misalignment. His online presence dried up. No new connections. No conference appearances. No publications. Just a soft vanishing act. Like a signal dropping out mid-call. And that's how some legacies end, not in scandal or fury but in a whisper no one remembers to echo. I didn't celebrate that. I didn't even really feel much when I heard it. Because by then, I'd realized the best revenge isn't seeing them fall. It's no longer needing to look. That's the part they never show in movies. The aftermath isn't loud. It's steady. Fulfilling. It's walking into your office on a Monday morning and knowing your presence doesn't need to be explained, it's assumed. It's watching a junior engineer gain confidence because you took the time to mentor him, and seeing him solve a system problem without asking for credit. It's receiving an invitation to speak at Stanford's Systems Integrity Forum and turning it down not out of arrogance, but because your real work is too meaningful to pause. I began spending more time at home. I bought a few tools, started woodworking again, something I hadn't done since college. There's something meditative about cutting clean joints and assembling something permanent with your hands. No noise. Just precision. I built a new desk. A real one. Oak with matte steel legs. Atop it, I placed a framed photo not of the summit or the launch, but of the old copier room, the one I took quietly on my last day. A reminder. Not of pain, but of patience. And then, the final full circle, a reporter reached out. She was doing a follow-up piece for the same publication that first ran my letter. "Where are you now?" she asked. I almost declined. But I agreed. We met in a sunlit cafe. I wore the same watch I had when I was demoted. She asked, "Do you think about them often?" I said, "No," then paused. "But I remember who I became because of them." She smiled, closed her notebook, and said that was the quote she needed. I left without checking what she'd write. Because it didn't matter anymore. Justice had already happened. Not in courts. Not in boardrooms. But in the quiet, dignified aftermath of a man rebuilding his place in the world, not louder, but deeper. Revenge wasn't my story. Restoration was. And in that restoration, I'd found something rarer than revenge ever offered: peace. You know, when all of this began, I thought justice would feel loud. That it would arrive with a bang, a confrontation, some final scene where the villain begs for mercy and I walk away unbothered. But real life isn't a movie. Real revenge, the kind that lingers, the kind that actually heals, doesn't come with a soundtrack. It comes with silence. With stillness. These days, I don't wake up angry. I don't rehearse comebacks in the shower. I don't check my inbox hoping for validation or an apology that'll never come. Because I don't need it. What I needed was to remember who I was before the noise. Before the humiliation. Before the room full of people turned their backs while I swallowed my pride. And I did. I found myself again. Not the man they demoted, not the title on the badge, but the builder. The problem solver. The guy who never stopped creating, even when they took everything else away. That's who I am. That's who I'll always be. So if you're listening to this wondering if it's worth it, if rebuilding is possible, let me tell you this: it is. You just have to walk away with your head high and your hands steady. Let them drown in noise. You move in silence. And one day, they'll look up and realize the foundation beneath them was yours all along. Justice isn't fire. It's peace.